Hey everybody, today I'm sharing my thoughts on these two board games. I'm going to take a look at Evergreen and also Seasons. Now these are going to be very brief reviews, going to be shooting from the hip, just so you get some of my overarching thoughts about them. Now before I get started on these reviews, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so let's start with Evergreen. Now this is a 1 to 4 player game that takes 45 to 60 minutes to play on average, and from my experience that is accurate. Now if you're familiar with a game called Photosynthesis that really did blow up maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, this one is directly inspired by that one, and I believe it is the same designer, but the difference between Photosynthesis and Evergreen is that this one you have your own player board where you're trying to map these trees out as efficiently as possible to absorb as much light as possible, whereas in the original Photosynthesis you're playing on a shared board, therefore making it way more cutthroat and confrontational. Now, I do like the clear objective in this game where you are simply trying to get as many light points as you can by absorbing the sun through this ultra cool thematic mechanism that I was always impressed with in the original Photosynthesis as well as Evergreen, which is so innovative. Where each round the sun is going to rotate around the board, and depending on the orientation, it's going to shine on the trees. The bigger trees will absorb more light, but it will cause more shadow to the trees behind it, of course taking the size of those trees into consideration. I love that mechanism, it works so well, and it's clear, clean rule set, and I really love everything about the way that mechanism works. Now there is also a degree of engine building here where when you take certain actions through the drafting of these cards, your skills will raise by moving up these little markers, which will let you do more growth, plant more trees, even plant these little bushes and rivers, which can help you grow things quicker and connect things together, because not only are you getting points in this game by the light shining on those trees, but also you're going to score points based on your biggest kind of cluster or group of those trees. And those two mechanisms tend to butt heads because the closer your trees are grouped together, it means that the more trees are going to be in shadow. Now, the way the game works here is, as I mentioned, used through this drafting system where you'll put as many cards out on display equal to the number of players plus 1. Those cards will kind of dictate what actions you can take and where you can take those actions. So you can see on the board here, you have this terrain broken up into all these different types. If I took, say, a white card, that means I can build in the white area. Now there are some exceptions when you get these bonus actions, but that's generally the rule of thumb there. And there's also this cool mechanism which I really like, and it's a general rule that I like in games, which is when you are done drafting, the one card remaining will go into this pool, which means that these little symbols here on these cards will mean that every fully grown tree in that section at the end of the game will be worth more and more points if those build up. So not only, again, are you getting those light points by spacing things out, you're getting the groups, but also those endgame points by the means of those, endgame cards that have built up, which you really do need to take into consideration, and it can really mess with your scoring if you ignore that. So I love the ownership you can take of your board here. I like the way you can map things out perfectly, try to score as maximum or as many points as you can. There's a good degree of kind of initiative as well, because you can try and snatch the initiative order to make sure you're going first next time and stuff like that. And also the card drafting in general is a good idea to divert from that kind of pure abstract nature of the game, because you're not allowed to just do free will and do what you want to do at all times, because you are going to be pigeonholed by what those cards say what you can do, meaning that it's not going to be repetitive and you can't always take the same strategy. Now this game also has a great pacing in terms of earlier in the game you get to take more drafting, or you get to draft more cards in relation or in comparison to the later turns in the game where you get fewer and fewer turns. So the game kind of squeezes you down as the board gets populated with trees. So, mechanically, I think this game is wonderfully elegant. It's so smooth, and there's not much I don't like about it at all, to be honest. Now, when I mentioned Photosynthesis earlier, that was a game I've always enjoyed, but I always thought that it was maybe a bit too ferocious for me, a bit too vicious, and it had a few rough edges when it came to managing your player board and putting things on and off of it. So this one doesn't have any of those kind of rough edges, but I do feel like maybe it went a little bit too far with being a bit toothless, because, you know, with photosynthesis it is so ferocious. This one is a little bit too forgiving, I think, and maybe a little bit too tame, whereas I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit somewhere in the middle to get that perfect balance. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there's going to be a huge audience for this game because it is so pleasant to play. It scales well, it ticks along at a nice pace. It's nicely produced. I mean, I think maybe people with bigger hands might find it a little bit fiddly, you know, moving these little trees around, but that is a nitpick, and I do like that forward momentum of, you know, your board filling up as well as your stats increasing as the game goes on. But all in all, this is a really nice family game. When I first played it, I was super keen on it. I'm rating it about a 7, maybe even a 7.5 out of 10. The more I'm playing it, the more I'm finding that I can get a little bit too much done for my liking. I find it a little bit too forgiving, being able to just, you know, sprout trees everywhere and grow everything. And I would have liked it to be a little bit tighter, and I have, you know, maybe allow you to tread on other people's toes a little bit more and be a little bit more in your face, whereas, you know, it's a little bit too loose for my liking. But it's a quality game. You know, maybe I'd rate it about a 6.5 out of 10 now. I don't think it's going to stay around long term before those reasons, but still a very good design that I think, you know, more family orientated gamers are going to get a lot from this one. So that is Evergreen. Okay, so let's move on to Seasons. This is a 2 to 4 player game that takes around 60 minutes to play. And I would say the main kind of features of this game are engine building as well as a bit of dice drafting. So it's a hybrid of a card and dice game where you're trying to get as many points as you can, of course. Now, this game does start with a closed draft where you'll be given 9 cards each, and you'll be doing like a round robin, you know, taking a card and moving the remainder of that hand on to the next player, and you're trying to build up a formation of cards to carry you through the game. So, as I said, it is quite front-loading, and you are somewhat restricted by the cards that you've chosen before you even start the game itself, because they're going to very strongly dictate the way that your game plays out. Now, there are ways to get more cards into your hand, but I have to say that's probably one of my nitpicks with this game, is that I do think the flow of cards should be a bit easier to give you more flexibility and options as the game goes on, as well as I think maybe it's a little bit too restrictive in terms of, you know, giving you too much of a choice to make too early in the game with what you're going to commit to. But other than that, once you're past that initial draft, I think this game flows wonderfully. It has a nice sense of direction in the game, as in each round you are simply rolling a bunch of dice equal to the number of players plus 1. You're going to draft those dice, which will dictate the actions that you can take, or some bonus actions you can take. And then you can go into playing these cards, which will be basically, you'll buy these cards by cashing in these different kind of energy tokens. So you can see that this one requires like a flame token as well as one of these feather tokens. And the way that the main way you'll achieve or gain those tokens is through drafting these dice, which you can see this one would say, give me a fire energy token, a feather energy token. But there are some other symbols on these dice as well, such as drafting more cards, being able to increase your limit on how many cards you can play in your tableau, which is a feature that I tend to really like in these tableau building games. And you can see here that this track determines how many cards you can play, which means you are drip fed the cards as the game goes on. So you're not completely overwhelmed with your options to start with, you know, because you might not even be able to play anything until you raise this track. So you can't just constantly play everything you want to at any time. This game also has quite a nice feature where you can take these bonus actions to get you out of sticky situations by converting tokens into other tokens, you know, giving you that extra space to play your cards, etc. But for each time you use those actions, you're going to start generating negative points, which is a nice little feature to kind of mull over. But I really also like this feature, which also featured in Evergreen, where the remaining dice left on that, you know, in that drafting pool will determine something. And in this example, it will show how many rounds or how many spaces around this wheel the round will turn and how these seasons will go. Because this game actually only lasts 3 rotations around the wheel. And depending on which season you're in, is going to show which dice are available to draft, which means that certain resources are going to be more scarce or more common. But it'll also show the value in which you can sell surplus energy tokens for, depending on if you draft one of these dice based on if they have this kind of wheel symbol on it, as you can see here. So you can see in the winter phase, the water and the feathers are going to be worth only 1 point each, whereas the green one here, the leaves, will be worth 3 points each, which is definitely a nice bonus and something to consider when it comes to those timings and when to hold on to tokens and when to get rid of them, because again, you do have a limit on how many of these tokens you can have at any time. And as you can imagine, with a kind of engine building, tableau building style game, the things you can do with these cards is quite remarkable. The game does come with a nice array of cards. And if you get more expansion material, it essentially means more cards to play with, which is a good option. So, you can see these cards do tons of different things, letting you filter through the deck, choosing your opponent and replicating their tokens they have. So if you trigger these at the right time, just gaining straight up victory points, and so on. And even some cards let you manipulate the dice. Some of them will let you, get rid of existing cards to free up more space for you. So the combinations are pretty much endless, and they even combine with each other. So the bonuses kind of compound to get even stronger should you wish to go a certain route. So pretty much everything about this game I enjoy, and I like that restrictions of the tokens you can hold. I like the restrictions of the cards you can play. The dice drafting is nice and tense because you really do need certain symbols at certain times, and you use your bonus abilities, take that hit, but also get to do what you want to do, and finding those combos between those cards. They're really nicely put together, get a nice flow here. Good decisions to be made as well. Now, one of my main issues with this game is not the game's fault. It is that recently a game came out called The Veil of Eternity, and this game has a lot of crossover with that game, but I think I prefer Veil of Eternity quite a bit more because it's just a little bit more reined in. I think it's a little bit more precise in the way that those cards work with each other. Now, admittedly, I am a much more experienced player when it comes to the Veil of Eternity, so I may not have unraveled the wrinkles of this game yet or discovered what is yet to be discovered. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to put the work in with this one because I see a lot of potential with this game system. But I prefer drafting cards as you go rather than doing that, initial, that initial closed draft. I find that a little bit too restrictive and puts you down a certain pathway. Now, I do like the fact that you can put those in the piles you see fit. So, if you want some earlier benefits that are going to carry you through the whole game, you can get those played instantly and carry those kind of end game bonus cards that might be a bit more expensive and put them in your third pile so they won't get unlocked until the end anyway. So, there are definitely ways to get out of those situations, but still, I'm not a big fan of determining your fate so early in the game. But all in all, I can certainly see why this one has a fan base. It's a really good little card hand management game. Nice synergies between those cards. Good decisions to be made. I love that remaining die system that you can use to catch players off guard and speed the game up if you wish to. Now again, my biggest apprehension is that it is fighting for the same game space as the Veil of Eternity, and I think that one, because it being so fast and me preferring the ongoing draft rather than the initial draft, I think that one is just going to edge this one out. But still, really glad I've played this one and I'm going to explore it quite a bit more. So that is Seasons. Okay, so that concludes the video. Two very high quality, well polished games here. Definitely a joy to play them both. Now, I'm not entirely sure if these games are right for me in my collection right now. Again, Evergreen may be a little bit too loose for me, and Seasons being in direct comparison with another game, but I'm still very happy that I got a chance to play these. And I'm definitely I'll never turn down a game of Evergreen, and I definitely want to kind of sink my teeth more into Seasons, finding those combos to see if this is going to be a real keeper or not. But still, hopefully these reviews have been useful for you. If they have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.